Pak Kiai Koiron. Before we start, let me tell you the mechanisms of this discussion. When there's a presentation, all the speakers will be muted, and then question will be submitted in the form of you can raise your hand through chatting, and then also you can write your question, as well as we can have a discussion after all the presentation. We have quite a bit of time. Each speaker will have about 20 minutes max for presentation. So we will have about 1.5 hours for discussion. We have 4 distinguished speakers this morning. We will start with the seasoned one, and then we will move on to the not younger, but less seasoned, but with new energy. Okay, let's start with Sydney Jones. I've known Sydney in 1981. That's when I met her. And she's still as energetic as today. Sydney is a seasoned researcher and analyst, particularly on human rights and conflicts. She has been based in Indonesia as the director of the IPAC, the Institute for Policy Analysis of Conflicts. She published hundreds of articles and reports on issues of human rights and conflicts in Indonesia and Southeast Asia in particular, which earned her issues of praise as well as honorary doctorate from the New School in New York. So today she's going to talk about the recent development in Papua, referring to the recent situations, asking or raising issues on autonomy khusus. Okay, silahkan Sydney.
Thank you. Can you put the presentation up?
Okay.
That's me.
That's Owens.
No, that yang satunya
Muhtar, yang
Sydney.
satu lagi Muhtar.
Bukan yang ini ya.
Technical glitches.
Yeah.
Is this right? Okay. So good morning, everybody. I just wanted to underscore that even though this morning's discussion is about infrastructure and development, that we have to look beyond infrastructure to some of the dynamics of the conflict. Next. I think one of the important issues to drive home is that all indications are that the conflict in Papua is getting worse. And it's not going to be solved by a strategy that focuses on ending isolation or raising income. Those are important goals, but they're not going to end the conflict because that's not how ethno-nationalist conflicts work. I think all you have to do is look at the middle-class students who are involved in some of the independence movements to realize that the political issues are attracting the better off and the more well-to-do in itself should suggest that alone won't solve. So I think the OPM has shown itself to be stronger with greater buying power for arms and ammunition than it has had in a long time. Next. Lanjut. One of the things that we've seen just from the UGM study of violence between, sorry, yang sebelumnya. Sorry, can you go back to the first, to the slide before? Yeah. So one of the things that we see from the UGM study is that there's been a steady rise. There's been a steady rise in violence in 2017, 18, and 19, and it's partly due to a change in strategy on the part of the OPM. Please go. Please go to the next slide. In 2017, 18, and 19, and it's partly due to a change in strategy on the part of the OPM. Please go. Hello.
Hello.
Hello. Okay. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah, it should be the slide before then, but leave it for now. So the indications are that the level of violence has steadily increased over the last 3 years. I just put these two slides up because it shows how different, how you can get different figures from coding things differently. The best recording of violence that's ever been made in Indonesia is the National Violence Monitoring System that collected data between 1998 and 2012. If you take just 4 years of data from 2004 to 2008, Papua came across as, without question, the most violent province in Indonesia, but also the political violence was only 6% of the total violence, according to that very comprehensive database. The UGM data didn't do collection as comprehensively as the National Database Monitoring System. So according to their more limited sources, they were getting a figure of 64% of the violence in Papua being accounted for by political acts. They called it separatism there. I think the real figures, if you did the same kind of coding, would be far under 64%, but it would be significantly higher than in 2004 and 2008. I just think that by no matter what system you use for recording data, the last 3 years have seen a significant rise. Next. Lanjut. Lanjut. Can anybody hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you clearly.
Can you move the slide?
Slide-nya terus. Konita?
Slide nomor berapa, Pak?
Is this the slide you want, Sydney?
No, I want the next one.
The next one. Terus. Yeah. Is it this one?
No,
Terus?
no, it goes before. I'm
Sebelumnya.
sorry, all the slides have got, they've all gotten messed up.
Terus sebelumnya. Sebelumnya. Terus. Sebelumnya.
It's going in the wrong direction.
Terus?
Okay, let's forget about the slides. Let me just talk. So basically, the crux of the matter is in the Central Highlands, with the Central Highland provinces, especially the 4 that surround the Freeport mine. And in addition to the fact that the OPM has gotten stronger in these areas with an increasing number of incidents of violence, we're also seeing competition among the commanders play out in this area, but also a more comprehensive strategy, probably in coordination with the Ka'anpe Bay, the West Papua National Committee. At the same time, we've seen targeting of migrants, and there's no question that the relationship between Pendatang and Orang Asli Papua have worsened over the last 3 years, especially if you start with the massacre of the construction workers in December 2018, and then you look at the violence of August and September last year, you realize that there has been specific targeting. On the other hand, there also has been no attention to the concern of Papuans that they are getting swamped in their own land. Their Tanah Ulayat is disappearing. The number of Orang Asli Papua in proportion to the population is decreasing. And there have been specific proposals made to address the issue of trying to stem in migration into Papua, and they have gotten no attention in Jakarta. Even when COVID approached or struck Papua in March and April, the Papuans tried to have a lockdown to prevent COVID coming in. And what they wanted to do was to prevent passenger travel by air and sea into Papua. And far from acceding to the request, Jakarta initially turned them down, partly, I think, out of concern that this was motivated as much by wanting to keep migrants out as by wanting to keep the virus out. But I think unless and until the migration issue is addressed, we are going to see more violence and more targeting of the migrant population in a way that is going to be disastrous for any kind of development strategy in Papua. The August-September violence from last year helped highlight the issue of entrenched racism. And I think we only have to look at how the Papuans responded to the killing of George Floyd and how they saw Papuan Lives Matter as an extension of Black Lives Matter that has taken fire globally, to understand how much the racism issue also needs to be addressed in a comprehensive way by the Indonesian government in terms of how it approaches local Papuan government, how it approaches local Papuan institutions. And it's in this context that we're seeing the Otsus debate over special autonomy come up. Right now, there are three options basically on the table to renew Otsu, the funding for Otsus out next year. So just a simple rollover of funding. That's how autonomy could be given more meaning than it has. Okay, I'm back here. Can you hear?
Yeah, yeah, we can.
Hello?
Yes, I can hear you.
Okay, okay, so the second option after, if the first one is renewing, is to revise the law more comprehensively. And the third, which is gaining ground in Papua, is to menolak, to reject special autonomy, because in the view of the rejectionists, it's produced no benefits in any meaningful way for Papua. Now, it is true that the independence movement is also driving the rejectionist movement, but I think the dissatisfaction with special autonomy more generally is much broader than simply the independence movement, because there is really a question of what kind of authority Papuans actually have. If, for example, they tried to ensure that only Orang Asli Papua could be elected to Bupati and Deputy Bupati positions, and that was rejected as unconstitutional, what does that mean in terms of what kind of autonomy, special autonomy, really provides? I think there are other examples. Another one is local political parties, for example. That was in the original special autonomy law, but it hasn't been given any kind of substance because, unlike Aceh, the requirement was that local political parties in Papua simply have same rules and regulations as any other political party, i.e. they have presence in more than 50% of the provinces in Indonesia, which makes no sense. So there are a lot of people that look at what Aceh got and what they didn't get in Papua, and it again is raises the question of what autonomy has been about. Then there's another question about people calling for dialogue in Papua. Dialogue has ended up being a completely empty phrase. Sorry, Bu Adriana. It didn't start out that way. I think the Papua roadmap that Bu Adriana was involved in with Muridan and others, Nellis Tabai in Papua, was the best analysis and the best program going forward for trying to address the conflict, but it didn't get anywhere. And the efforts at dialogue failed partly because I think there weren't, the issues that were framed for dialogue weren't concrete and practical enough. And that's what needs to be on the table, but practical and concrete, not just in terms of health and education, but in terms of issues like correcting history, justice, migration, and the role of the armed forces in Papua. There has to be some concrete proposals that can be on the table for discussion, and that's the responsibility of the Papuans as much as it is of the of people in Indonesia. So just talking about dialogue as an empty word doesn't get us very far if there aren't those kinds of concrete proposals on the table. So just in terms of migration, security, and justice, we've got government regulation that was passed by the Papuan provincial legislature, but which was then by Jakarta, by the Ministry of Home Affairs. We have some concrete proposals on security that mean, the Papuans call for pulling armed forces out. Given the situation with the OPM these days, you're not going to get the armed forces pulled out of Papua. But there's a lot you can do short of that in terms of trying to review the tours of duty, review how people are vetted going into Papua, what kind of briefings they're given, what kind of community relations programs can be initiated, whether there might be a zona dame in one particular area or so on. But you don't have to go for all or nothing. There are in-between measures that can certainly be discussed. What you can't do, I think, is to call just for having some kind of negotiation with third-party mediation. It's not going to happen. The Indonesians are not going to accept that, and I think it would be mad for anybody in the Indonesian government to negotiate or even think about negotiating with someone like Benny Wenda, whom even other Papuans find unbearable. So I think what has to happen is some of these other issues to be taken and pulled apart into manageable components so that these can be addressed individually. And one final point is on the Jokowi landslide, where he got 100% of the vote in many of the Central Highland provinces in the last election. People need to understand how fraudulent Central Highland elections are and how unbelievably inflated population data is in the Central Highlands. Nobody knows how many Papuans are there. And one of the issues that the Papuans have demanded, which I think is something that the Jakarta government could take on, is to get an accurate and transparent recording of population, meaning you have to allocate many more resources than has been allocated to date to the BPS to actually do house-to-house counting in very remote and very difficult areas. The census has been suspended for the moment because of COVID, but there's still a chance in this census year to get an accurate data count. And I think that's critical to any subsequent analysis of what to do about Papua going forward. I'll stop there. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Sydney, for a very comprehensive presentation and the complexity of the problem in Papua. I won't comment. I will continue with the discussion later. We move on to the second presenter, Pak Owen, who is the director of OSANA. It's the governance and accountability family company. It's called OSANA International. He has been in Indonesia for 40 years, start with teaching at ITB, and then working together with Bapenas, as well as working in Aceh and recently in Papua, particularly dealing with issue of governance, disaster management, sustainable urbanizations, and democratic and decentralization system. So without further ado, silakan Pak Owen.
Thank you very much. And also thank you to all those who asked me to join this discussion. Selamat sejahtera kepada kita semua. Actually, I haven't recently worked in Papua. My last time in Papua was in 2010, when Pak Suebo was governor for the second time. And my first time working in Tanah Papua was in 1989, also when Pak Suebo was governor. And at my second trip there, Bram Atruri was governor in Manokwari. And just for good fortune, Bram Atruri, when he was still with us, was a close personal friend of my wife from the days in which he was in the Marines. But those two occasions in 1989 and 2010 gave me a passion for Papua. It's a wonderful place and there are wonderful people in Papua. The point of my presentation is in the title. Infrastructure is not a service, but there is no service without infrastructure. Next slide. To illustrate my point, let's look at hospitals. Hospitals are infrastructure, but they're not a service because healthcare is the service. Why build a hospital when you have not enough doctors and nurses to provide healthcare? I'm sorry, but I know it's because the money is there. It's not because there are people who are sick and need a doctor and a nurse, unfortunately. Next slide. And we illustrate with roads. Roads are infrastructure, but they're not a service. Connectivity and mobility are the service. Connectivity is the connection between supply and demand, between where you are and where you want to go. And mobility concerns the speed in which you get there without wasting time. So, roads connect people who work and live on land and connect them to cities and ports, and good roads give them mobility. So the issue is whose land and what does the connection to cities and ports do for the people who own them? Does it only lead to the people losing their land to others who get benefit? Or is land use so controlled and facilitated that it will benefit the people? Does it only give mobility until the roads collapse and are impassable because they're not maintained? Land use control defines the service provided by the infrastructure, and maintenance and maintaining the road maintains the service, but it is the connectivity and the mobility that is the service. Next slide. So let us, next slide, yeah. So let us look briefly at spatial planning in Papua. National and provincial spatial plans and strategic zone plans have been prepared for Tanah Papua. Now they need to be elaborated in Kabupaten and Kota plans and detailed spatial plans. Applying the national laws on spatial planning and on villages in Papua, like elsewhere, is a problem. But helping Kabupaten districts and villages to collaborate in preparing these plans in Papua is not like anywhere else in Indonesia. If consultants do the same in Papua as elsewhere, the plans will not really help. But we have a project coming up, just started, DFID UK, with its Papua Land Use Planning Project, is advising 4 Kabupatens to develop their spatial plans in an appropriate way for Papua. And I really hope Papua sets up a network amongst their consultants so the best ways can be used for all. Next slide. The reason for land use plans is land use control. Spatial plans are no use unless government and people take them seriously and together develop the capacity to monitor and control land use over the people. Sorry, land use for the people. Please note, there's 2 main functions of spatial plans. They direct investors to invest in appropriate places, and they protect the rights of people who use their land for appropriate uses. Next slide. And so we come, hello, Next slide.
Terus slide. Ya, terus slide.
We want to slide on land use control. There it is. Spatial plans are no use unless government and people take them seriously and together develop the capacity to monitor and control land use for the people. And now on Trans-Papua Corridor, next one.
Slide terus.
I'm wanting a slide on Trans-Papua. Trans-Papua Corridor is creating access for communities to connect to local and national and even global markets. But there is widespread fear from past experience that outsiders with money will take away the rights of communities to use their own land and gain benefit from the new road. But the road cannot be blamed for this. And so I think we've jumped a few slides. Can we go back, please, to slide 7?
This right?
That's it. Thank you. So how can we assure the road support a needed service? It's regional governments that is responsible for assuring that the road benefits the whole community. Most importantly, through land use planning, careful licensing, and effective control. Regional government and the DPRD are accountable for the people for doing this and making sure that they fulfill their responsibilities. There are governors representing the government in each province for oversight and guidance, and ministers are responsible for the president. Next slide. That's going backwards. We want to go frontwards to slide 8.
Maju terus ya.
8, that's it. New ideas of autonomy. And vehicles go along national roads, provincial roads, kabupaten or kota roads, and desa roads, kampung roads. Connectivity is dependent on 4 levels of government. So who is responsible for connectivities and where is the autonomy? The autonomy for roads is no longer doing your own thing, but taking responsibility for a share of the effort in providing the connectivity. So what is the special autonomy of the roads? I don't think there is any special autonomy for roads, because the special autonomy is in the land use planning and the control. A bit of an aside here. There is a national interest in roads in Papua. That is, Papua should have no less connectivity and mobility than anywhere else in Indonesia. But the society and the community that is connected by roads is Papuan. The law on roads states that there should be a national road between provincial capitals, but the fastest link between Manokwari and Jayapura is toll laut. So, in fact, we really need to think about what is national interest and what is provincial interest and what is local interest when it comes to roads. Next slide, 9. Papua and national governments need to change their perspective on road development. No longer should they think, let's build, design, build, operate, and maintain infrastructure. But from now on, they should think, we should all think to provide a service of connectivity together, maintain that service and improve that service. And in part of that is by designing and building more infrastructure, always by maintaining it. Connectivity cannot be achieved with just pembagian urusan or the division of responsibilities. It is the collaboration between all levels of government in all aspects that is needed to assure the connectivity in the interests of the community. And now to slide 10. So what is the special autonomy? Local governments in Papua, like many other parts of Indonesia, do not have the competence to do their own spatial planning. But spatial planning in Papua is not the same as anywhere else. So Papua needs a very special help in preparing its plans. The special autonomy for spatial planning and land use control is the need for the needs given to local governments elsewhere in Indonesia. Help in the public participation, help in understanding the potential land uses, help in resisting bad investors. And so 11, slide 11. So now we go back to health. The special autonomy in health is needed for local governments in Papua to provide health services and maintain them and improve them for Papuans, in part by building hospitals, and collaboration with whoever is necessary to assure that health care for the Papuan community. We cannot expect all local governments to find the right sort of doctors and nurses amongst their own people, but we can expect them to hire from outside and send the best daughters and sons to the best schools for future health care, and collaboration with others to find the special health needs of Papuans. And slide 12. And so we can look at education as well. Education urgently needs a shared responsibility for preparing Papuans and your children for the future. Papua and the national curriculum fail to educate most Papuans well. And the problem is not the infrastructure. And I recall my friend Willie Toisuta with his efforts to help Papuan develop school education suitable for Papua. We need more such innovation and adjust our infrastructure to match. Slide 13. Now we look at the need for world-class universities, not to compete with UI or UGM or ANU, but to supply the best and most appropriate experts for the research, to supply the best possible inputs to Papua and to help its kekhususan and keistimewaan. Such universities need the best infrastructure, but universities are much more than just that infrastructure. Slide 14. Next slide. We can build ports, but they are no use unless we have plans for building trading alliances and for developing things for trade. We should not depend on national projections for trade, but we should make regional plans for expanding the trade. And we can attract business, but that's no use unless it benefits the people. And unless the people are prepared with the skills they need to reap the benefit. We should not depend on the national projections for infrastructure. We should make plans and, of course, implement the plans. Slide 15. Papua is different, but the infrastructure is the same. Engineers design infrastructure. They survey the situation and design according to engineering standards. These standards are national standards, which have been based on international standards, even though the situation in Papua is most likely to be different. Engineers can measure what makes Papua different: the soil, the projection for demands for vehicles or patients or school children or drinking water. Next slide. But on anything else, next slide, on anything else, Papua is different. It's different by nature. It is istimewa. It is different by the way we design Papua. That's the kukusasan. And all differences should be recognized and respected to assure infrastructure will benefit the people. Papuans and the nation must decide and agree together what is the difference, so that together they provide the right infrastructure and so that Papua makes the right preparations to use infrastructure properly. And here I make a brief comment about the problem of the Constitution and special autonomy. If we look at Jakarta, it has special autonomy, and its special with autonomy. The level 2, the Kota, don't have their own DPRD. That's unconstitutional. So the definition in the Constitution for special autonomy by law means that the law can have a provision which is different to the Constitution. But that difference must be what's in the law. It's the same with Yogyakarta. The governor of Jakarta is not elected. That's not constitutional, except that the special law that provides keputusan for Yogyakarta to be outside the Constitution. So the issue is not that that the Papuans can't demand the Kepala Daerah to be locals. It is that that is not part of the agreed keputusan for Papua. Now, that might be hard to negotiate, but it isn't an issue of constitution because there other regions have got special autonomy, which selectively has items in the constitution which are not implemented in those regions. So let's go on to this public participation. Public participation is where the government asks for the public to join their policy debates. But it is extremely hard in Papua, both for the government and for the public. So why don't we turn it around and talk about government participation in the lives of the community? And what should that participation be? And how can the government improve the well-being of the lives of the people in each region? And we build infrastructure for them as part of the government participation in the lives of Papuans. And slide 18. What about the bad guys? There are too many bad guys in Papua. Next slide. Too much violence, too much corruption, especially in planning and providing infrastructure. Don't just fight the bad guys. Give them no room. It is the job of the politicians, the public servants, and all of society to give bad guys no room to move. The function of infrastructure is not to make politicians and business people rich. It is to help provide the basis for a prosperous Papua for all. Next slide. Kasumata. Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you, Paun. Yeah. Sorry, Sydney and Paun, for the glitch in the slides. The next presenter, Pak Simon, is unable to come, but we have a replacement, and that is Brigita. Hold on. Brigita Haisic, who also belong to the same organization, and that is PMI. This is Papua Muda Inspiratif. Brigita is the manager of Pasar PMI Mamta in Wamena. So Brigita, please, it's your time.
Nama akunnya siapa Bapak? Karena belum kita jadikan co-host.
Bagaimana?
Nama akunnya
Share slides, yeah.
Yeah. Okay, then we'll have Billy Mambrasar. He's a wonder boy from a small village in Papua who has traveled all over the globe studying at. He is the founder of the non-profit organization Kitong Bisa, who has educations for the children in Papua. Prior to his position, right after he graduated from ITB in Bandung, Pak Billy worked for British Petroleum, and then also he runs a couple of companies, and currently he is the presidential special staff. Silahkan, Pak Billy.
Thank you very much for the opportunity given to me, and I would like to appreciate the facts, the presentations that was given by Sydney and the previous speakers, and I could see the connections of the things that we talked about with what I'm going to present. Although I don't have any political background and I'm not a politician myself, I would see myself as a social entrepreneur and an education activist. So I would kind of present my perspective on that. And my title of the presentation today is Human-Centered Development Process in Papua and West Papua provinces. And pretty much this idea has touched by the previous speakers, just like before me. What is it all about? It is a mindset that is shifting from the government to provide all the services, including infrastructure, into actually investing in the people. And by the people, we mean the indigenous people, who will be the people who stand on their own feet to do the things on themselves. So we're talking about the infrastructures, we're talking about the facility, the public service facilities. In my opinion, it should be the design and the idea should be crafted by the people, and it should be executed by the people as well. So the shifting mentality and mindset from the government as the providers and kind of directing what they have to do, instead being a moderator and work together with these people, and these people will do it themselves. And the concept of the co-creation is something that I learned and I am very fascinated and interested about. When I work for the private sectors, I would see how the private sector shifting, the way they invest in the community shifting from giving just money like for free, like free money, into actually giving the people right and ability to work and do the development themselves. And that comes the important part of education as the way to ensure and increase the capabilities of the people to be able to do that things. If you take a look at the spatial autonomy itself, and I would say that I am one of the people who were benefited by the spatial autonomy scholarship, because I come from a very poor background. Even to get into the high school, my dad at the time, my father told me that, son, we don't have money, so it's impossible for you to continue your study to senior high school. But I am very determined to study as high as possible. So I told my dad that we have to find a school that give the education for free. Because at the time, there was no free education. At the time, we still paid BP3, SPP or something like that. So it wasn't a free school at the time. So I told my dad that I wanted to study. So I don't care, I'll find a way to study. So at the time, I was in Japan, and there's a scholarship selection committee from Jayapura came to our place and announced that there's a high school in Jayapura in which if we pass the selection process, we can get into that school, live in dormitory, got this, the scholarship and everything, and study for free. So I took the selection process. I went to Jayapura and I studied in high school in Jayapura for free. And after graduating from high school, there's an opportunity also at a time to study in different universities in Indonesia. And I chose ITB because I wanted to be an engineer. I always wanted to be an engineer. So I took the opportunity to take part in the selection process, and I got this special autonomy scholarship to finish my undergrad in ITB. And I am just one of the other thousands inspiring stories of millennials, Papuan millennials. And by millennials, I'm talking about those who were born at, around 90 to 2000, who got the privilege of having scholarship to study in different, universities in the world. And I got that privilege as well. And if you take a look at the data, I know that if we're talking about the data, there's going to become, a lot of debate and discussion, and people try to take it to political topics. But I am speaking on behalf of as an education activist, a social entrepreneur, and somebody who was benefited by the scholarship as well. We could see the increasing school participation rate, even though it is still on the national average. So it is still not below the national average. And I kind of agree with the previous speaker's point of that the government should invest more into healthcare and education as two critical problems which happening in Papua. If we want to make this concept of co-creating, make the Papuan themselves doing the development for themselves, then we need to invest more in the healthcare and education. We should, improve the things that we were. I could see the graph, the figure increase, but still long way and a lot of things to do to increase the average scoring to, close to the national average. We also look at the Human Development Index increases, although again, still below the national average, but we still see the positive progress of increasing. And as an educationist, I am very passionate to look at what kind of specific intervention and approach that should be done for the indigenous Papuan people to accelerate the score. So I'm gonna do my PhD starting this year on September. I'll do research on the human development using Papuan and indigenous Papuan as the subject of my study, to take a look at how can we accelerate the education and human development index itself. So then we can prove and we can, kind of actualizing this concept of co-creating of that indigenous people, Papuan will be doing the development themselves. There's a loophole in the whole, even though I was mentioning about the spatial autonomy, the scholarship, and how it has been doing a lot of positive progress, still we need to improve a couple of things. If you take a look at the way we invest in the community, and we're talking about the education. Education is not just about teachings. It's not just about that teachers provide lessons for free for the students, but the education or human development is a combination of the whole things. How do we map? Because when we want to develop Papua, then we have to map what's kind of the needs of the indigenous Papuan people, right? What do we need? What do we want? What is our expression and stuff? For that, we need to do a mapping of how do we bring the Papua and West Papua provinces moving forward. So we have to have a mapping, and based on the mapping, and we will see and make the human development plan based on the map. And that's where we craft the design of education to fulfill the mapping that we have done. For instance, when we're talking about green economic, blueprint, in which I was part of the people who also designed it, because I am a believer that I don't want an economic progress in Papua then compensate the beauty, the nature, and will destroy. We destroy the environment. So I am a big advocate that if you want to invest in Papua, you have to invest rightly, properly, and correctly. And what do I mean by rightly, properly, and correctly? Is that number one, the investment should work together with the indigenous Papuan people. Number two, that it won't destroy the nature. So we have to protect the nature. So when I was being part of the advisors for the Green Investment Blueprint, we see how we map to achieve that concept of green investment in Papua. Then we have to also include the indigenous Papuan people to be part of the mapping, how these indigenous people will then be the players of that investment, of that businesses based on the nature. So that's where the mapping is very important. Then when we design the educations to fulfill the map, then we have to have a complete package of how we treat these indigenous Papuan people to be able to fulfill that map that we have done. And for that, we need training. And this is a loophole, a big loophole in the current programs, but we're getting there. We're getting better on, and I am now with my friends and with my Papuan friends, we're kind of help the government to design a systematic training process, including the database of the indigenous Papuan people. Then we can have a utilization plan. I know these concepts sounds vague, but let me bring you to a concrete example. For instance, Billy Membrasar, I am going to study and I'll do engineering study. Then the training process will be part of this education process, in which we will give consultancies and mentoring to Billy to be able to tailor whatever he's studying with what he's going to do when he comes back to Papua and West Papua. So he knows when he's studying there, whatever Papuan in Papuan youth, but I won't touch that. But the idea is that after all these Papuan youth who have studied in different universities, in different institutions, I want to give the mindset to my Papuan fellow that the scholarship which were given to us is investment. And by investment means that we have a huge responsibility to come back and develop our land and develop Papua. By giving millions of rupees to study in universities in the United States, in Japan, in China, that means that on our shoulder, there's a big responsibility for us to come back and help our other Papuan fellows who haven't been, who haven't got a privilege that we have got. So with my friends, and two of them are joining our session today, Brigitta and Carlos, they'll be joining the session soon. It's hundreds of us who has been making movement. Brigitta is there, Brigitta Hisage. So it should be Brigitta Hisage, not Hisage. So sebagai anak-anak muda Papua, kita punya responsibility, tanggung jawab yang besar untuk membangun tanah Papua. Karena we have been educated, we have studied, we have been invested in scholarship, so we have to come back now and develop our land together. We have to help increasing the healthcare. We have to help increasing the education accessibilities for the people. And what I'm asking from the government is very simple. It's very simple. Please trust us and please work with us. We can collaborate with you on developing our land and developing our people and our nation for increasing even the prosperous Papuan moving forward. I'm closing here in these slides. Thank you very much for listening, and I'm open for further discussion, but I would open the next opportunity for Brigitta and Carlos to tell how they have been doing good work, by starting up this movement of inspiring other Papuan youth and other Papuan people to develop our land. Thank you. Saya kembalikan kepada moderator.
Oke, terima kasih Pak Billy. We are moving on to the next speaker, Brigitta, who is now joining with us. And she is going to talk about the economic and infrastructure development in Papua. Silahkan, Brigitta.
Halo,
Halo,
Brigitta.
it's Brigitta. Host, can you bisa di unmute?
Sudah saya jadikan co-host, cuman
Oke.
yang bersangkutan belum.
Itu sudah ya. Okay, maybe you need to unmute your speaker.
Sinyalnya kurang stabil sepertinya, Pak.
Oh ya, ya Ibu Brigitta is based in Wamena right now. I think.
Boleh di close dulu mungkin videonya untuk bisa ini stabil di suara dulu.
Boleh lanjut.
Ya, halo, selamat siang.
Selamat siang.
Iya, thank you for the time give to me. Saya Brigitta Hisage. I'm the program manager of Young Papua Inspiration. Halo?
Yeah, we can hear you. So please proceed with
Iya.
your talk.
Yeah, I'm the program manager of Young Papua Inspiration. We are in the Papuan Jayapura region. We have 10 permanent manager in the Mamta area. Now we are running the Papua Mama Market in Jayapura. Now we've been running for about 3 months. Kami sudah berjalan selama 3 bulan.
Mungkin Brigita bisa cerita selama 3 bulan ini apa yang sudah dikerjakan, apa yang sudah dilakukan begitu.
Ya, baik Kak. Tidak apa-apa Pak, bahasa Indonesia saja.
Tidak apa-apa, lanjut
Nggak
bahasa
apa-apa.
Indonesia.
Silakan.
Ya. Jadi kami teman-teman Mamta selama 3 bulan ini kami ada yang sudah berjalan, kami jalannya gula dan beras selama 3 bulan ini. Yang kami ada mendata sekarang, yaitu ada beberapa mama-mama asli Papua yang punya kebun. Kita mau mendata, bekerja sama dengan mama-mama ini, supaya sayur-sayur mereka itu ditaruh di pasar kami sehingga memudahkan mama-mama ini untuk berjualan. Jadi kami menampung sayur-sayur dari mama-mama asli Papua. Untuk nanti dipasarkan di Pasar Mamta. Selama 3 bulan ini yang sudah berjalan yaitu gula dan beras. Kami membantu pemerintah untuk menetralisir harga pasar, sehingga kami menjual dengan harga yang dapat dijangkau oleh masyarakat ekonomi kelas menengah. Dan kami juga sudah mempekerjakan beberapa mahasiswa untuk bisa menjadi kurir di Pasar Mamta, sehingga mereka punya pekerjaan sampingan. Selain mereka kuliah, mereka menjadi kurir.
Kemarin juga Brigita dan teman-teman baru bertemu dengan ini ya, dengan dari terputus ininya sinyalnya.
Mungkin Pak Billy bisa.
Ya, mungkin ya sambil menunggu Brigita bergabung dan masuk.
Yeah.
So the basic idea of this movement that I've touched, udah kelihatan ya?
Yeah.
The basic movement of this movement is that Papuan youth have to have responsibility, right? So when we are educated, when we have studied, when we have done something, that we have to come back and develop our island, our 2 provinces. And what Brigita does is doing is actually just one of these other, other hundreds youth who have been doing different stuff at the moment. Because we feel that as a Papuan youth, we have to come back and help, our country to develop provinces instead of us, open our hands and asking to be served. So if you see this kind of different, beside Brigita and Carlos, akan ada Carlos juga akan gabung habis ini untuk bercerita bagaimana Carlos memulai bisnisnya juga di Jayapura. We have these hundreds of youth who have been, thinking of how can we develop our provinces. Some of them have started movement, social movement. Some of them have started the businesses, and the businesses also including technology businesses, culinary, food, hospitality, tourism, and everything. Coffee products, sagu-based food, and applications, apps, technology apps. This food product. Tourism, and all this stuff. So this is the real Papuan youth who want, it's very simple. We just want to help the government to do the development. So there are three preconditions to actually ensure that this concept works, that actually we can moving progress human-centered development. The topic that I'm talking about is, number one, we have to keep investing in the education and healthcare. Whatever we have done right now, we have to, do more. We have to invest more when we have to improve the way we do the investment in the people by education. Number two is the willingness of the government to collaborate with the people, to do the development. So shifting the mindset from thinking that I and the government have to do all things and have to dictate whatever we have to do. Instead, let's have a conversational kind of, way of work, talk to the people and work with them on doing the development. And number three, the willingness of the country to recognize these wonderful people. Like, probably most of you will not know ada seorang anak dari Wamena yang namanya Brigita Hisage yang telah melakukan hal-hal luar biasa dalam membangun tanah. Maybe you never know. You don't know today's event when Brigita muncul dan Brigita memperkenalkan dirinya, dan everybody knows there's a woman from Papua, a very young woman who is very, very inspiring and doing this, development, membantu mama-mama Papua dan membantu pemasaran dan seterusnya. We have to, government as a country, we have to recognize more of these people, of these Papuan people who have been doing great things for the provinces and then willing to collaborate and work progressively with them. And I do believe, and I'm very optimistic that we're gonna go and progress. Let us check apakah Brigita atau Carlos udah gabung ya. Oh, Brigita udah joining lagi, boleh di-approve? Nah, ini juga hal yang harus kita thinking of, like improving ya, the internet, activities. Oh, itu bisa di-approve. Meet.
Sudah,
Brigita.
cuman ini sinyalnya belum stabil, jadi belum bisa joining masuk.
Okay, yeah.
What we can do is we can continue with discussion, and whenever Brigita can connect with stable connection, we can always break and provide time for her to give or to continue her presentation. Would that be acceptable?
Yes. There's gonna be there are gonna be two people joining us, Carlos and Brigita, but I think both of them are facing the internet connections. Sorry, yeah.
Then this is something that you need to think about, Pak Billy.
Yeah, we are
technological thing.
Yeah, I'm currently doing discussions with the technology operator and also with the Ministry of BUMN to think of how can we increase, the internet. Yeah.
Okay. All right. Let's continue with the discussion. Please send your requests for discussion through chat, and so I will open the first session. Anyone who would like to either comment or ask question to one of or all of the speakers. And then the host will unmute your speakers. Yeah. Anyone? Oh, okay. I saw Pak Imron raising your hand. Please, Pak Imron, It's can the host unmute? Okay. Silakan.
Well, thank you very much, Pak Amri. I think you have organized a very excellent discussion among knowledgeable people. And I think this should not be the first, probably more to come. I think we need to really open up discussion on Papua. Number one, I just want to reiterate the fact that mostly people are talking about autonomy fund. Actually, the law stipulated that there are 4 fundamental objectives of the law. Number one is to establish the political party local, and number 2 is to establish what they call as reconciliation and truth commission, and number 3 is autonomy fund, and number 4 is I think it's about I don't know. I forgot the 4th element of the most important part of this law. The problem is, I think, the usage of the fund is really. We need really to focus on that, because according to the data that we obtained, I visited the provinces on a number of occasions, that the fund is not used properly by the local elites. Instead of focusing on 4 elements, number 1 is to support the education, the local economy, the infrastructure, and the health sector. The use of the fund is basically allocated to not related to those 4 basic objectives. That, I think, underlines the point Sydney mentioned. For the last 3 years, there has been kind of, conflict being augmented, so to speak, probably because it's going to end. The fund is going to end next year. So some of those people think that if they create problems, probably they can bargain either to extend or to make it even bigger from the 2% of our national allocation fund. So those are the 2 issues that probably related to the escalation of the conflict between Indonesia and the OPM, so to speak. So I think there are a couple of people behind this. They just want to portray the situation in which they want to portray the situation in which conflicts is getting bigger. So they want to use this conflict in order to pressure Jakarta to give more concessions. So it's basically it's not about obtaining certain political objective, but instead of that, they use this elites use this conflict to basically manipulate the fund, either to for their own personal usage or for other purposes. So I think the government should focus on this instead, trying to pinpoint, trying to locate, trying to find out who is behind this. Otherwise, this conflict will continue on.
Okay. Thank you, Pak Imron, for the comment. Probably one of the speaker would like to respond. Yeah, Sydney, please.
Yeah, with all due respect, Pak, I just don't think that this is about the Otsus money. I don't believe that the major reason why the OPM has increased its territory, increased its resources, and probably increased its support over the last 3 years is due primarily to a desire for increased Otsus funding. I think it's also not the case that it's only a handful of people who are giving them support. I think that if you look at the 4 or 5 kabupaten in the highlands where the core of the violence has taken place and the core of the expansion has taken place, these people are integrated into the communities the same way GAM was integrated into the communities in Aceh. And it's not just a handful of people looking for money. I think it's much more serious than that. And I think in some areas of the highlands, the government has lost control of territory. Not much, I grant you, but some. And I think it should be thinking about a strategy to address this that goes beyond simply renewing Otsus funding. It's not about money.
Okay, I saw Pak Imran raise your hand. You want to respond to this because it's a very totally opposite perception of what is going on the ground. Silakan. Okay, Pak Imran. Please, can you unmute Pak Imran's speaker, please, host? Halo, Mas. Can you bisa di unmute untuk Pak Imran?
Okay,
Okay,
Sydney,
sudah, silakan.
Yeah, let me explain myself a bit clearly. Number one, those OPM, they don't know about the autonomy. They don't know about the fund. Absolutely, we are on the same page with this. The problem is they are a master puppet, feeding them in order to mount a much stronger resistance against the government. They don't know about anything, but they benefited from the fund in order to purchase a lot of ammunition, a lot of weapons. That is why they are stronger currently. But the fact of the matter is they are being manipulated. Certainly, you are absolutely right. They don't know about anything. They are being manipulated in order to pressure Jakarta to yield more concessions to the local elites. That's the point.
Okay, I will give Sydney another chance to rebuttal this. Please, Sydney.
No, I think it's just we'll agree to disagree on this one. I just think it's much more complicated than that. So sometime when we sit down and have coffee together, Pa Imran, we'll duke it out.
Okay, I think that's a good idea to especially talk about the unsavory things. Okay. Any other question or comment? I probably Pak Billy and Owen, if you would like to comment on this question, the issue of and there may be to look at the relationship between what is going on in terms of the conflict and this idea about building infrastructure and education. It seems that these two go hand in hand on the ground, but at the same time, it has not been addressed how to make what is intended as this kind of issues of development program could be progressing in this context of conflict.
I'm not gonna talking about the conflict and isolations of the conflict itself. Sydney is the expert. I need to learn more from her. I sent her text to meet and talk and have discussion about whatever inside her heads. But I'm talking. I'm kind of trying to connect that with my proposed idea about human-centered development. A concept of human-centered development is that the simple logic is this: when you build a school for someone, and then give the school for them to use it. Number one, maybe they don't know the design the design of the school itself. Like, why do we have the school here initially? Number two, they don't know how to operate it. Number three, the purpose of how the strategy of operating it for long term or sustainability, right? Instead, so what's going to happen with the school is that probably it will be destroyed. It will be the people will not guard it or will not preserve it and stuff, because there's no sense of belonging of that stuff. It's going to be different if the society or the people themselves build the school for themselves. Then they will feel the ownership. They'll feel that we have to guard this place, we have to operate it, we have to ensure that it's sustainable and stuff. So the idea about human-centered development is that make the people design the things and also working and collaborate with them to do the development themselves, and they will feel the ownership of the stuff that is being built, the infrastructure, the public service, and whatever. And theoretically, that will reduce the tension and feel of the difference between these two different entities, between the beneficiaries and the people who give the benefits. I would give my response on that context. Thank you.
All right. Yeah. Owen, would you like to comment something?
Just very briefly. One thing that I have an agreement with Imran is that there are bad guys out there. And the people who are working against the interests of the people of Papua, many of them are very active in Papua, doing the wrong thing for their own personal benefit. And I think that is a matter of grave concern. It's not just a case of one or two people in positions of power. I would suggest that it's also those people who appoint unqualified people to be the head of dinas. It's the people who are misusing the funds for COVID, and a whole set of other problems of abuse of power that are in Papua. And it's also related to the conduct of the military and the police. It's not saying that they're all bad. It's just that the bad guys have got too much room. And what we need to do is help the good guys. And I hope there are lots of people like Billy who, given the chance, can do wonderful things. Thank you.
Okay, let's open another session, something that's related to this topic or something that's new. Please, anyone who would like to comment or question, raise your hand.
Yes, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yes, but Owen, I think you are absolutely right. There are bad guys out there, so we need to.
Imran raise.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. Please. Yes.
Yeah.
Silakan,
okay,
Pak
Owen, you are absolutely right in pinpointing the fact that there are bad guys operating out there. The problem is when central government sends inspectors to inspect projects, they they just say, okay, we don't want to be inspected, otherwise we want freedom. So we need two to tango, actually. So Jakarta should also send qualified inspectors in order to inspect properly projects being carried out in Papua down there. Otherwise, the bad guys will continue operating as if they are immune, they are outside of the law. And this, I think, exaggerates the conflicts at those two provinces. So my point is, we need to really send good guys in order to get those bad guys, in order to allow Papua to progress and to excel as we so wish. Otherwise, this will continue as a vicious circle.
Okay, Pak Owen, you want to respond, please?
Oh, yes, indeed. My thinking about special autonomy is that Papua has to have special autonomy for Papua. But the central government also needs to have special autonomy for Papua. In one of the most difficult stages of implementing the special autonomy law in Aceh was a long series of discussions and workshops in Jakarta between the Acehnese and the Indonesian governments to get that relationship right. So it's not only what's in the law, it's also that process of both sides understanding their responsibilities. And what, the law is one thing. How is it implemented is just as important. And the existing autonomy law is just open-ended. There isn't a concept of pengawasan or accountabilitas or so forth. And there is no way that the responsibility of the president, which is in the constitution, can be implemented for the people of Papua, not for the central government, but for the people of Papua themselves. So I think one of the breakthroughs that I would pray for is that the government in Jakarta can see that in order for special autonomy to work, Papua needs extra special effort to be competent, to be honest, to be true, to be transparent, and focus on the needs of the people.
Okay, thank you. It seems here we have a few things that's still muddy. There is this security approach, this development approach, and then there's this initiative from the ground of a young Papuan who wants to do something. Meanwhile, Sydney has reported the complexity of the situation on the ground, as well as the boundary, something that is non-negotiable. So maybe later on I will give you time. Now let me, Sydney, do you want to comment on that first, and then I will give time to May. Yeah, you already raised your hand.
Thank you. I just want to go back to some of the core issues which have come up every time special autonomy has been raised and which have not been addressed. But Imran mentioned the Truth and Reconciliation Commission. We've also not had any progress on local political parties, and we've had no progress on dealing with migration. Migration is the one issue which is going to tear Papua apart. It's already tearing Papua apart. It's already worsened the relations between Pendatang and Orang Asli Papua. What concretely is going to be done Papuans, especially in the highlands where the conflict is worse. So I think it's something that has to be addressed, and the government can't ignore it. I'm not sure how you do that constitutionally, but there's already been at least efforts to improve ID checking in Bali, of all places, because Bali's also worried about immigration. Anyway, I want to throw that on the table because it's not going to go away as an issue.
Okay. All right. Thank you, Sydney. May, would you like to comment or your question?
Hello, thank you for the time given to me. As I'm one of young generation, Papuan generation. I would like to comment about the freedom and also the law and also so many things. Siapa yang namanya tadi? Actually, we people, we doing something and we raise our voice by looking, by experience, and by what have happened around us. So for me, freedom has so many things, has so many meanings. It's not like being part away from one nation, but freedom for us means let me stand on my own foot to develop my land, to develop my people. So for us, young generation, when we say about freedom, means give us the space to develop our people, to develop our land. How can we do that? So we need only the education. Please educate us. Please develop my people. Please give us the space. So we don't need analysis. We need action. I agree with Miss Sydney. It's beyond the money. So it's beyond the fund. It's beyond the political issue, like the government said. It's about the people. I would like to say like that. I can't.
Okay, thank you very much, Mai. Yeah, thank you for your appeal. And Pak Billy, would you like to respond to that first, and then I'll give the others time to respond.
I cannot mute. Oh, thank you. I couldn't mute myself. Sorry. Hi, thanks, May. Yeah, pretty much. I totally agree with what May just said, and also Sydney said. That again, back to the human. When we emphasize on the human, then we have to think ways of investing in the human. You know, so it's a totally different approach that we have to rethink of. Yeah. So what I wanted to say is that I totally agree with just what May just expressed.
Okay. Is that it? Okay. Owen, would you like to respond to this?
Just a very short comment. It's wonderful that there are people like this. I think that we should be giving them as much support as we can. And I really hope that Billy is able to get that message across to Jokowi, and that through this younger generation we can find a way of getting over the difficult problems and look at the problem as what we want in the future, rather than just trying to get over the hurdles in front of our faces. When we have a vision for the future, when we've got people who see that vision and are working towards that vision, then that helps us address the difficult hurdles.
Okay. Okay. Next, Pak Imran, you want to comment on this appeal?
Okay. probably I didn't make myself clear. When I'm referring to fund, the autonomy fund, I don't mean that the problem is centered on the fund. The problem is centered on the misusage of the fund. Because the autonomy fund is designed to fund 4 strategic sectors. Number 1 is education. The one that young lady is talking about is about education. Number 2 is about infrastructure. Number 3 is about health. Number 4 is about developing local economy. So the fund is there to fund those 4 strategic objectives. The problem is the local elite, or elites for that matter, use that fund for other purposes, including, I suspected, funding the separatist movement in order to pressure more the government to yield more, in order to to face the end of the distribution of the autonomy fund next year, according to the law number 21, 2001. Currently, as I understand it, the central as well as the local governments are discussing whether or not to prolong the disbursement of this fund or to make it even bigger from the current one, which is 2% of the national allocation fund, or to make it even bigger, probably more than 2%. I think currently the government, central government, with the 2 provinces are discussing the matter seriously, and we hope that soon they will be able to resolve the problems. Now, as I mentioned to Sydney a few minutes ago, Sydney, I think you are absolutely right in observing that the conflict is getting bigger and bigger and bigger from time to time, especially for the last 3 years. But the problem is it is related to the end of the fund next year. And I suspect the conflict will be even bigger because the autonomy fund will be ended next year. So I believe there are connections, or there is a connection between the 2. The problem is how central as well as local governments can coolly sit and talk to try to find the bad guys, as Owen mentioned, who benefited from this chaotic situation happening in those 2 provinces. Once we can identify and send them to a special place to contemplate upon, probably the problem will be, we will be able to resolve the problem, at least a bit easier than expected. Thank you.
Thank you, Pak Imran. I'll give the time to Sydney, but before then, I would also hear Pak Billy comment on the strategy in maneuvering your program so that you can have enough resources, because the program seems fantastic, but you are put in the context of both conflict as well as the so-called unsavory use of the fund. So how would you maneuver so that your program would be successful by using the fund from the government as well as from the private sector? Meanwhile, I would like Sydney to comment on this issue. And also there is a question through Facebook. This is to Sydney Jones. I was surprised knowing the rise intolerance among youth Muslim in Papua based on PPIM UIN Jakarta 2018. How will this situation impact development in Papua? This is from An Anshori, a Kiai from Jawa Timur. Okay, Sydney, please.
Okay. Yeah, I just think that by believing that misusage of funds is the main driver of conflict over the last 3 years, that it ignores the extent to which the highlanders in Papua have systematically built up a power base very carefully and very cleverly in a way that has transferred power from the coast to the highlands, that in a way that has also reinforced the independence movement in the Central Highlands. It's not just an armed movement. It's a political movement that has both above ground and below ground aspects to it. I think that it's also got genuine support in Papua. It's not just a manipulated stratagem of bad guys. It's an overwhelming popular movement in those 4 or 5 Central Highland districts. And to ignore that is to basically cut yourself off from finding a real solution to this worsening conflict in the area. So I would leave it at that. In terms of the religious issue, I think part of the problem is that the migrant issue and the migration issue has become completely tied up with religious issues, so that there are some Papuans that see the migration as being tantamount to Islamization, but it's also the case in parts of Muslim West Papua. There have been the same kind of efforts to stop the construction of mosques that we've seen in Jakarta and Jabotabek with the efforts to stop the construction of churches. So the intolerance has manifested itself on both sides, but it's tied up with the migration issue. So unless and until the migration issue is addressed, you're not going to be able to address the religious intolerance issue.
Okay, thank you, Sydney. Pak Billy, would you like to respond to this? Particularly, this is a difficult question for you, but probably you know the ground. Also, you know how to go to where you are now, and at the same time, now you are in the government, have access. So, what would you envision in maneuvering so that your program would be successful in this kind of complex context?
Yeah, so we kind of did a initial survey on the millennials, perspective about how do we use the fund properly right now. So we're still finalizing the study result. But what is so interesting about the finding on the study that we did was that, number one, most of them think that it's not about how much money do we have on the fund, but how do we spend it? And the aspirations of the people on how to spend the fund is to do community investment. And the community investment that they were talking about, we tried to find research, and we found that it is being implemented in New Caledonia through the kayak center. So the idea of the kayak center is actually you have this money, but then you invest in the society, and by the society that means not just the government infrastructure, government structure, the political kind of elites, but to the community directly through via community centers. And by investing in that community centers who led by the indigenous people, and they'll do the development based on their plan, based on the structure, based on the values, and based on the wisdom, that kind of, bypassing all this structure and inefficiency on the structure directly to the investment, to the people themselves. The big homework, or preconditions to ensure that this concept works is the education and the human capabilities. So before doing the investment on the community, then we have to prepare. So we have to have a roadmap on preparing the people to understand what is development and how do they do the development themselves. I know probably people will say, oh, kita udah punya RPJMD, kita udah punya RPJMN, dan seterusnya. But what's happening with the RPJMD, RPJMN, it's still embedded in the formal structure, in which when you're talking about the formal structure, ada kayak semacam semacam order vertikal yang membuat bahwa banyak sekali proses tersebut tidak bisa efficiently involve the aspirations of the people and the people doing the investment and the development themselves. So when we're talking about investment in education and human capabilities of doing that, I would propose and suggest, and this is what I've been telling the president himself, is invest in the young people. Invest in the young people. There's a huge bunch of Papuan millennials now who are educated. May, Brigitta, dan Carlos, and Simon are just 4 of the examples of hundreds, even thousands of others. Let me tell you an interesting story about May. May went to study in Germany using the special autonomy scholarship as well. She came back, and what she does, she's starting up a community-based learning center in her village. She's a indigenous tribal of Sorong called Moi tribe. So Moi tribe are actually the landowners of the Sorong cities and the bigger Sorong and stuff. So what May does, what May did, she came back and using her own resources, she found money herself, tried to open up a small library in her neighborhood to invite all the indigenous people to study in the library that she started. My question would be, if we do have like trillion of rupees in the Special Autonomy Fund, why is it so hard for an indigenous, humble young woman like May to get investment in the social initiative that she's been doing? And May is just one of other thousands of other young people who have been facing difficulties when they try to, start their own initiatives or their own enterprise. They find it's very hard for them to find, a capital investment in their initiatives. So, I hope, Pak Amri, you get my point. Like, they have to have a reformation on the fund utilization, bypassing it, using external or third-party kind of, community-led, initiative. Then we will prevent the money to be used exclusively by just certain elite. On the wrong purpose. Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah. Okay, thank you. I think it is a very elaborate and also a perceptive answer in envisioning, but at the same time also you're raising the old issue of centralization. So how, and as well as the model of disbursement of funding has not changed to allow a more transparent as well more effective in using that. So probably we need more people like Pak Billy to suggest the government to have a new model for this. Okay, there are a couple of questions here, but I would like to mention from the chats that the audience have a high hope for the young generations here, May and Brigitta and Simon. So I think this is something that is very that we everyone need to support. Aside from that, there's also this comment about the 4 issue that's raised by Adam Su. The 4th problem and in Papua, which is very dire and serious, is discrimination, human right, poverty, and special autonomy. Any of the speaker would like to comment something that has not been mentioned before is discrimination. It's related to probably the comment and that Sydney Rose on the migration. There is also another question through Facebook. What can the government do to make sure that government allocate the funding correctly? Is there any kind of supervision system by the central government? Or is there any kind of more detailed plan provided by the central government as Mr. Owen proposed before? So maybe Pak Owen, you want to respond to that first?
Indeed.
Hold on.
I was too fast and unmuting. So here we go. A few years ago, I got some data about Kabupaten Apiori. And out of that data, I discovered the salaries of the pegawai and politicians in Apiori was larger than the whole economy. How can that be? Where does the money go? I'm not blaming the people of Apiori for this. I'm blaming a concept whereby the budget is based on money instead of being based on what to do and allocating the money. The whole concept of dana otsus, to me, is wrong. It should be indicative that there will be money, but it should be based on what is agreed we're going to do. So if we had a whole approach to planning to say, this is what we want to do, this is how we're going to go about it, have we got the money? And the answer is in Papua, we're going to have the money. It's going to be there. Yeah? So if we can turn it around. Now, the legal basis for that has been in Indonesia since 2003 with the financial management law. So there is no reason why we can't do it. And we can do it, especially in Papua, if we go about it the right way. When we've got the best financial minister in the world, and when we've got a top vice minister for finance who has spent many years as being an expert on poverty alleviation. So we have got the basis for changing the money situation. Now, when it comes to the oversight, we have I spoke to the to KPK, and in KPK, I said, asked them, what are you doing to avoid corruption? And they said, what we're doing is we're aligning ourselves with local media. And what we do is we help local media. But what's the problem with local media in Papua? Well, we know about that. They've been silenced. So how can we then get better oversight? And the way we do better oversight is the places where the oversight already exists. It exists in the money. It exists in the personnel, the appointment of people to top positions. It exists in the development planning through Dirjen Bangda. So we have got a way of improving the oversight from the central government's point of view. And then maybe if we did that the right way, we could open the door for getting the right sort of oversight from the community. But unless we have got the focal point is, are we doing what we should be doing for the people? Instead of how are we spending the money? Well, then we are not going to be able to have a proper system for Papua. But just a final point on this, for Pak Billy, back in the 90s, the World Bank started a project in Indonesia called the Kecamatan Development Program. This grew into PNPM, which was taken over by the national government. It was designed to help small community initiatives. Then what happened, of course, was it became like another government in itself, competing with the DESA and the Kampung. And so what happened is we got the birth of the Undang-Undang Desa. And the Undang Desa was intended to get money to the community. And if that money is not available for Mai and her friends in Papua, then there is something wrong with the way in which we're using that money, which is already allocated for this. Now, the problem there is it's allocated without saying what it should be and without saying how it is accountable. So, there should be changes in the way the central government organizes the money and the development proposals, but it also should be within Papua a much larger dialogue in the proper use of Dana Desa. Thank you.
Thank you, Pak Un. Yeah, it seems here there's a couple of issues that you raise. One is the approach to deal with the dynamic in Papua, especially free speech and media, is still the same. So maybe Pak Imran later can respond to this unchanged approach, which is security in Papua. And secondly, on the money issue, would it be possible to think about the special body like BRR in Aceh? And about 3 years ago, when Pak Luhut came to Australia with his team, there was a mentioning of the body, special body like that, but then it just went off without any follow-up. Now, authority to manage the negotiable and what is non-negotiable, so that some kind of innovation in approaching the issue of Papua outside of the old centralization and security approach, as well as in managing the funds. So I'll start with Pak Imran first.
Thank you, Pak Amri, again. I wish to address two fundamental issues. Number one is about migration that Sydney refers to in our conversation. Well, migration is a natural phenomenon. You cannot do anything about it. It happens around the world, including in Indonesia as well. And in Indonesia's case, our constitution allows all citizens to move around and settle in wherever they want. Our constitution is the parameter, but the sensitivity is there as far as West Papua is concerned. Because why? Because once race is being played out, then migration becomes a problem.
Okay.
So I think I still remember vividly when I went first time to Yogyakarta back in 1980s. I was also discriminated against. The Batak people, they could not afford to get accommodation or things like that because we were being considered as barbaric. The problem is, I think we need to sit and talk. Put aside the race card, otherwise it will continue. Migration will become a thorny issue as soon as race card is being played out. I think Sydney probably can find a way on how to deal with it later on. Probably we need to have a private conversation on that. Number two is about you know, the authority Pak Amri was referring to, because currently there is no such an institution that can basically design, implement, as well as supervise programs in Papua. I still vividly remember back last year, I think end of last year, the president received around 60 public figures from the province, during which the president, they demanded the president to institute, design, implement, as well as supervise programs in Papua. I think I'm not so sure, but definitely there are moves to basically institute the agency as soon as they are able to settle the issue of whether or not to prolong the disbursements of the autonomy fund or not. I hope that agency that Pak Amri is basically referring to will be able to overcome, the difficulties the provinces are currently being confronted with.
Okay, thank you. Pak Billy, would you like to respond to this?
Okay, I would say that what, hello?
Yeah, hearing you.
I totally agree with the point made by Owen about the Dana Desa, Dana Kecamatan, and everything. That's long been problems. So now the problems are, number one, in the money, the accountability, but number two, also the involvement of the local people in the process. It also become another problem. So many of the international donor and national donor have find difficulties to actually liaise with the local people because they don't know how to work with them or how to make a plan with them. That's even including the RPJM day, which is actually the official process of the government itself. So there should be a different way of conversation and talking with indigenous people on what and how do we do the development. We have to kind of, when we're talking about Papua and different places will have different social structure. That means that we cannot have a centralized system of structure on making the planning and execution. I just met with the governor yesterday, the Papua Barat governor yesterday, and we talked about this. We talked about the social structure. On the planning and executions of the development programs, we have to actually align with the social structure. And the social structure is kind of, difference between one place to another place, even in Papua itself. So that should be, that should be adjusted. We need to do more study and more research about how do we align with that. What else? What other point that I have to touch? I think that's it. Yeah, I totally agree with what Owen just said. We need to revisit the way we work, both on the government-led development process and also the non-governmental involvement development process. And what I proposed in my latest brief to the president was that we have to have this body that actually becomes a bridge between the local people and the government and also the non-government donors. And this independent body should not be kind of, freely intervened by the official structure of the government. Because when you make it part of the government, then it's going to be a business as usual. And the idea of kind of, playing blaming games is also not good. I mean, blaming games is that, all right, okay, we give you money, then you have to be responsibly using the money wisely and stuff. No, we have to actually accompany the process, the development process and money utilization. And I propose this body, which is actually youth-led, to be, to be a new way of spending and executing spending the money and executing the programs. Yeah, thank you.
Okay, thank you. Now, Sydney, can you respond that? And also looking at who would you consult if you want to create such a body that seems strongly suggested by Billy? Who would agree, who would not agree? Yeah.
Let me go back because there's so much I want to comment on.
Okay, all right.
So let me just start by a word on Dana Desa, because it's very complicated. You have to start with the fact that if you look at sources of violence in Papua, the biggest source of violence is actually not separatism, it's Main Hakim Sendiri. It's vigilante violence. And that means that whoever comes with money runs the risk of being attacked at a local level, especially when when the trucks come with the Dana Desa money. So one of the things that happened in a couple of villages in the Jayawijaya area that we looked at was, they're supposed to have these mentors that come and help the village develop programs, as the Kecamatan Development Program did in the past. There's no village administration because most of the people are operating on an absentee basis anyway. So there wasn't any kind of structure that a mentor, even had one been available, could work with. So what happened? This business grew up in Wamena of putting together village development plans, and then for a fee. And then you had something that the village could show to any inspector who came in. And when the trucks came with cash to deliver the funds for the Dana Desa program, the administrator basically had no choice other than to distribute the funds to effectively small clusters of clan leaders, because if he didn't distribute it, there would be violence. And if anybody can find a way to avoid that particular pattern, good luck, because it's a question both of not having enough village mentors to go around, not having a village structure in place because of widespread absentee government, not having a secure way to distribute the funds, and just perpetuating the system that exists. So it's complicated. Second thing is on that meeting of the 61 figures that came from Papua, they had zero credibility with many in Papuan civil society. They were handpicked because they were pro-integration, known for their pro-NKRI views. So it wasn't as though the most representative leaders of civil society in the church and others in Papua were called to a meeting. It was a very controversial group of people who came. And then if we're talking about the issue of what can be done about migration, first of all, I think it's a misnomer to say that everybody just comes naturally, because it didn't start out that way in Papua. It started out with transmigration program. Now, you're right, people are coming voluntarily, but I think there are things you can do to try and restrict the influx. One of the things that was proposed earlier on during the Special Autonomy Plus discussion of 2013 and 2014 was to ensure that no Papuan land can be owned by non-Indigenous Papuans. Okay, you have to define who constitutes an Indigenous Papuan, and that's not always easy, and you have two different definitions operating in Papua Barat and Papua, but nevertheless, it is a solution that you can try to work through and it's there on the table, was proposed and was discussed. So make Papuan land inalienable. That's a place to start. And then finally, in terms of things that can be done that would diffuse the situation somewhat in Papua, one really easy step is to stop charging people with makar. If they've been involved in violence, charge them with ordinary crimes. Don't give them political martyrdom by charging them with makar. And if you stopped, that would actually defuse the political situation to some degree, because people aren't being either stigmatized or turned into martyrs in the same way. So just one easy suggestion.
Okay, good. One thing, Sydney, I still want to hear from you. Who would be agreeable to the management of the development of fund? Would the Papuan agree, or the central government agree, if there is a body like BRR?
There was a history to why BRR didn't work in Papua, and I think it was too many economic and kepentingan from Jakarta who were involved, so that Kuntura wouldn't have had the same kind of free hand that he had in Aceh. But I don't know enough of the details of that. So I think that's something that Pak Billy can look into.
Yeah, okay, it seems that probably it's Jakarta who is not so agreeable. Pak Billy, you need to work harder. I have a couple of people. Oh, okay. Owen, you want to say something? Okay, please.
I'm going to be naughty and mention somebody's name. Of all the people helping Kuntoro in Aceh, the one who was most effective in getting things done was, in fact, a man who had spent time in Papua. And he was in charge of reconstruction in Nias. And he is now in charge of the MRT in Jakarta, Willy Sabandar. I don't recommend him for the position, but I do recommend Pak Willy and Pak Billy have a long chat together. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you. Before I let the Pak Billy to speak, there are a couple of people who want to raise a question. So Ronald Richard, would you like to say your question or your comment? Ronald?
Yeah, hello?
Yeah, okay. Okay.
Can you listen?
Yeah. Now, yeah, we can hear you. Yeah, now we can hear you.
Yeah. First of all, thank you so much for giving me a chance to give my talk or my perspective. I just want to comment about the Special Autonomy Fund management, because I'm also the one who involved from the first time when the Special Autonomy Fund was submitted. So I saw, regarding the issue of Autonomy Fund, the situations before Special Autonomy Funds, Papua governments don't have any experiences to manage the funds in billion rupiahs. Yeah, the numbers, I think the numbers was, or the budget, Papuan provincial budget at the time is just 200 billion something. Yeah, that is the very high budget at the time before Special Autonomy Fund came to Papua. But after Special Autonomy Fund was taken and the Special Autonomy was delivered, it's just trillion, you see, trillion funds coming to Papua. And Papua governments don't have any something like training or whatever I can say, yeah, or to to prepare Papuan governments how to develop, how to manage these funds properly. Yeah. And you know, I don't understand. Then the regulations and the special autonomy fund for manage that funds too is not at the time is not signed by the Home Minister in Jakarta. So they use other regulations under autonomy regulations number, I think number 22, 1999, yeah, at the time, yeah, to use for the manage so for managing the funds, special autonomy funds. Before the regulations number 32 2004 is taken, yeah, that something happened from 1999 to 2004. The range of the time that special autonomy funds is crazy using by Papuan government without training, without, you know, without develop their personal skills how to manage it. That start of the corruptions from now, from that time. You know, after this, after autonomy daerah regulations number 32 2004, and then there is also regulations from the Home Minister department is number, I think 55 or 58, something like that, for how to manage the fund, but not under special autonomy law regulations, but under autonomy daerah regulations number 32 2004. So you see the crest of the regulations about managing special autonomy fund. That's also make Papuan government confused because no regulations to manage the special autonomy funds under special autonomy law, but special autonomy funds come to Papua, but the management of the funds by regulations from autonomy regulation number 32 2004. So we just say, ya, uang otonomi datang, tapi bukan dengan regulasi khusus untuk dikelola, tapi dengan regulasi dari undang-undang otonomi daerah. That makes Papuan confused, and also makes their head of regencies is become the king, because under autonomy daerah regulation number 32 2004, many of the kings develop in Papua. Yeah, they cannot control by provincial government because special autonomy law is belong to provincial government. That is something make confused, and that's happened until now. So many regulations change, 32 2004, and then 12 regulation number 12 2008, and after now I think we have a new one, it's number 23 2014, something like that. But the special regulation for manage the special autonomy funds, not, I mean Papua don't have until now. Yeah, that's why I just want to criticize. So they mistaken about the special autonomy funds. We cannot blame that belong to Papuan governments. It's not fair. But it's collaborated mistaken by Jakarta and Papua too. That is more fair. So we have a responsibility to criticize these issues. Yeah, if you want to help Papuan, I think that issue have to be in our perspective, so we can help for make better in the future how to manage the special autonomy fund properly. That's my corrections only. Thank you so much.
Okay, thank you very much. Yeah. So I'll have the speakers to respond to this. Is Pak Billy around? Okay. Silahkan Pak Billy.
Well, point taken. Given by no defense, no whatever. Point taken. Yeah.
Okay. Sydney, would you like to comment? No? Owen?
Oh, just very briefly,
Yeah.
It's all very well to go back and criticize so many of the laws that were made in the years after 98. It's all very easy. What the problem is that period of reform, instead of leading to a process of continual improvement, the law on local government in Indonesia, that's the one passed in 2014 now, can be compared with the local government law in Victoria, which is amended maybe 6 or 7 times every year. It's a process of continual improvement. And what should be happening is a process of research and feedback from laws being implemented should go back to a continual process of DPR for the national level and DPRD in the province and local governments to say we need to continually make things better. The idea that we don't have continual improvement is the core problem. That, of course, things were imperfect in the first 5 or 6 years of after 98. Of course they were. But the mentality is that laws are hard to change, instead of saying laws can always be made better. That's all for the moment.
Okay. All right. Thank you, Pak Owen. Okay, Pak Billy, please. Yeah.
Okay, just extending on the Owen point of view about continuous improvement, and also a bit responding to Kakak Ronald's point of view about the blaming game, or whose fault is it? It's central government or the local government. I would say that it should be, you know, improvement in both sides, both central government and the local government. And on the continuous improvement aspects of the of Owen, when we're talking about the spatial autonomy law, there's an aspect of this perdasus perdasi, which is actually the translation, like detailed translations on the spatial autonomy on the execution level. And this production of perdasi and perdasi should be the responsibility also of the local government, that we need to mentor, to coach, to actually working together with the local government on making or producing the right perdasus and perdasi to actually make the implementation action plan on the spatial autonomy law itself. So I hope you got what I mean, Pak Amri, right? I mean, instead of actually blaming the local government cannot produce the perdasi or perdasus to actually implement the grand design of the spatial autonomy, then let's help coach and guide them to also make these law products to make the implementation plan. And again, as a young Papuan who believe in the progress, I would suggest to think as the spatial autonomy fund from the community investment perspective, instead of the budget to be spent and exercised upon, you know, something, you know, just spending. That's it. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other comment from other? Okay. Imran, please. Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you so much. I just want to address 2 points. Number one, the issue being raised by Billy, the inability of the local government to produce local regulations. I think it is very notable. The problem is this inability of them normally is being blamed to the central government. Actually, they need to produce local regulations in order to implement the spatial autonomy law granted back in 2008. One, that is number one. So Billy is absolutely right in pinpointing the case. Number two, transmigration. Transmigration has been a non-issue in Indonesia for many, many decades. That is why I need to underline this point by Amri. When it comes to Papua, since the race card is being played out, migrations becomes a problem. But I think Sydney's concern is also legitimate on how to settle this problem finally, in order not to offend, the Papuans. But the movement of people in Indonesia, we cannot restrict. This is a democratic country. Our constitution guarantees our right to move and settle in everywhere in Indonesia. We need to convince people outside Papua or inside Papua that we need to really walk a fine line as not to allow Papua to go down the path of apartheid. Number one, the autonomy law has already stated non-Papuans are not allowed to hold public offices. Number one. So I cannot compete to obtain a public position in those two provinces. While the Papuans, they are free to compete everywhere in Indonesia. Number one. Number two, of course, being the local economy is, we need to admit the fact that the local economy is being dominated by non-Papuans. That, I think, creates social problem. That is why we need an agency, as Pak Amri mentioned, just to make sure that those special autonomy fund is being administered properly to develop four strategic, designated strategic objectives. Number one is local economy, empowering the Papuans to take, to develop local economy. Number two is, of course, education. Number three, of course, infrastructure. And number four, of course, health, education, infrastructure, and local economy. If, for example, that agency is able to administer and to supervise the fund to fund those four strategic objectives, I think slowly we will be able to overcome the difficulties Papuans are now being confronted with. Otherwise, of course, it will continue on and on. Everybody will suffer, while we are currently being faced by so many crises, health crisis, economic crisis. Probably this is the time for us to sit and talk and resolve our difficulties together.
Okay, thank you, Pak Imran. Yeah, I think you raised a couple of questions, and I think Sydney needs to respond to that.
Okay, just very quickly on the transmigration issue, it hasn't completely gone away, Pat. Yes, it's true that there hasn't been the same kind of organized transmigration into Papua for a long time. However, it's left behind some serious land issues which are still in contention, especially when areas of Kebun Sawit come up, where there are new claims on behalf of Adat groups for land that was taken for transmigration way back in the 70s and 80s. So there's still a residue from that period. Not only that, but also on the border, particularly in the Arso area, there are also some desa terpadu, which are basically set up along the border with trans migrants, again, coming in as part of a security measure to both develop and settle along the border. I can't remember how many desa terpadu there are now, not very many, but it's it's not an issue that's completely gone, even though the big issue is the pendatang that come voluntarily. There, you don't have to ban people from traveling, but one of the suggestions that came up again during the Otsus Plus was that there would be a program to check all IDs at ports of entry, both air and sea, and anyone who didn't have a valid ID could be sent back. So all they were saying is anybody who comes into Papua has to have a valid KTP. And that in itself would stop a lot of people from coming in. The second thing was that they wanted a program of seasonal workers so that people who were coming in to work on projects would not get residency in Papua, but would get a kind of seasonal work permit. And this was seen as a creative solution to try to address the concern over migration. Okay, maybe there are concerns there, but if you don't give Papua the authority to do some of these issues by themselves, and you assume that the Constitution applies absolutely 100% across the board in exactly the same way in all provinces, what's so special about special autonomy?
Okay. All right. I think on that note, we are approaching the time to end this discussion. I think personally, and I think also, I feel that this is quite productive, quite a number of important issues that are raised here. And also the voice of the Papuan, the young Papuans very much have been heard here. There are still many problems. So to close this discussion or this webinar, I would like to have Pak Billy to give a closing remark, if you wish, please.
Okay, thank you. I was busy writing notes on every speaker's input, and I also plan to meet Sydney because I need to to listen directly from her on there are several points that she mentioned here. Very much productive and very much a very good input. For me, with my current position in the government, coming from a non-political background, non-politician, I was a person who is very indifferent about politics, because I studied engineering, I work in the private sectors, I started my own business, and then I became social entrepreneurs with a vision that I want to change the Papuan education and Papuan future, because I love Papua so much as a Papuan, right? And then when the offer came, and I asked my father, because my father is a teacher in one of the village in Papua. He has been teaching for 40 years, and he never been a public servant. PNS, karena kita bicara isu PNS kan lagi panas-panasnya kan ya. Sekarang kan isu PNS, OAP dan non-OAP. And my dad was like, you know what? I am an indigenous Papuan. I've been teaching my whole life for 40 years, and I never become a public servant. For me, that's fine as long as I've thought and I've created a Papuan brighter futures. And I met the West Papuan governor yesterday, Pak Domingus Pandachan, and I told Pak Domingus, I am the son of Isaskar Mambrasar, and you were taught and educated by my dad when you were in Serui. And he went like, oh yeah, I was taught by your father. So you're Isaskar Mambrasar's son, yeah. And from that moment, I saw how my father's dedications for 40 years have been producing the great minds of Papuan leaders now. And I want to follow his path, and that's the reason I want to be a teacher instead, an educator instead. Then came the offer from the president asking me to help him, and I was very scared because I'm very scared of politics, like being in the stage talking to political experts, bringing Papuan issues is something terrifying to me. But then my dad told me that, son, if you want to make an even bigger impact, then probably like Daniel in the Bible, you have to work closely with the king to advise him on things that we should do and we shouldn't have done. So in every single opportunities like this, I try to be as objective as possible to listen to all input from Sydney, from Owen, from all the other speakers. Then I'll try to make a very objective input to give to president and tell him that this should be done and this shouldn't be done. And after giving the input to president, I'll pray that God will open his heart to follow my input. Or if he doesn't follow, then probably I should find another way to make a progress. So to close my remarks, I am a believer in the progress. As Owen said, continuous improvement. So continuous improvement is about not blaming something that happened in the past for the sake of it's all mistake and it's all wrong. But what is so important about it is that how then we move forward and make a progress. And that's my commitment as a Papuan youth, that I want to work as hard as possible to make a progress in Papua with my current position and also with my friends out there. Thank you. Yeah.
Oh, I think that's a very, very potent statement and very good way of closing this session. So thank you very much, Pak Billy, Sydney, Owen, and also Pak Imran, as well as others. And thanks for everyone who participated in this webinar. Also for the people who Desantara, Pak Kiai Koiron, and the host of this seminar. For those who need a certificate for this seminar, you can send your request to the link. Yeah. Okay, goodbye everyone. Thank you very much. Have a good day and have a good weekend.
Okay, we can close this seminar ya.
Ya, ditutup.
Okay, thank you so much. Sorry for the problem.